I'm Emily. I've had my share of rough patches, but who hasn't, right? My dad was my rock, my everything ever since mom passed away when I was just a little thing. It's been the two of us against the world. He always stressed the importance of education, scraping together every dime he could to fund my college dreams. You're going to make it, kiddo, he'd assure me with a wink, even as he dropped another handful of coins into our battered college fund jar. I believe him. More than that, I believed in us. After high school, I started at the local community college, aiming to make a name for myself in investment management. It was there I met Jack. He was part of my cohort, charming and a scruffy, just rolled out of bed way that somehow worked wonders on me. We clicked instantly, stealing glances during lectures and sharing jokes over lukewarm cafeteria coffee. Then the ground beneath me crumbled. Dad passed away unexpectedly, no warning, just gone, and like a house of cards in a breeze, our financial security fluttered away too. Turned out the college fund was more hope than reality. With Dad gone, not only was I missing him and his guidance, but I also faced the stark truth that my college days were numbered. I managed to scrape through my first year on remnants and resilience, but had to drop out as the money dried up. Dad had left me the apartment, a small 3-bedroom in a worn-down part of T-Town. It wasn't much, but it was home. Jack first came over to the apartment on a chilly evening, his hand stuffed in the pockets of his faded jeans. "You live here alone, Emily?" he asked, scanning the room where the wallpaper peeled gently at the corners. "Yeah, just me now," I replied, trying to smooth down a particularly rebellious strip of wallpaper. "It's not much, but it's what I've got." He watched me for a moment, then stepped closer, taking my hands in his. "Let's get married, Emily. I want to take care of you. Let's start our life right here." It was sudden, sure, but nothing in my life had ever been planned out, so why start now? "Okay, Jack," I said, and it felt right. We didn't wait long. The wedding was as modest as they come, held at the city hall with a couple of friends as witnesses. Jack's parents didn't show, they'd never really approved of me. "Too plain," they whispered, thinking I couldn't hear. "Not one of us it dung," but Jack squeezed my hand and whispered back, "I love you, that's all that matters." After the ceremony, we walked back to our apartment, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows on the sidewalk. Jack cracked open a bottle of the cheapest champagne the corner store had to offer and poured us each a trembling glass of bubbly liquid. "To us," he toasted, lifting his glass to us. I echoed, the champagne fizzing on my tongue, tasting like hope and new beginnings. Age Chapter 2. Promises made. Jack and I had an agreement. He'd hit the books while I paid the bills. Once he was done with college, it would be my turn to chase the degree I'd left hanging when life got too heavy. Simple, right? I thought so too. But nothing's ever that straightforward. I worked 2 jobs by day. I was a cashier at a grocery store, dealing with endless lines and the occasional I-8 shopper. By night I switched aprons for a waitress gig at a local diner, serving up greasy burgers and lukewarm coffee to truck drivers and late-night drifters. It was grueling, but I pushed through, fueled by the thought of someday walking back through those college doors. Jack, meanwhile, was knee-deep in his studies, or so he said, but his demands grew with them. "Emily, when's dinner? I can't eat this fast food crap anymore," he'd complain as soon as I dragged my exhausted body through the door. "I need something decent like Mom used to make." I'd bite back, fatigue, lad, anger, tossing my keys on the table. "Maybe learn to cook it yourself, Jack. I'm not your mom." He'd scowl, his face closing off. "I'm studying to make something of myself. Least you could do is keep the house decent." His words would slice through the weariness, sparking a fire in my chest, yet I'd swallow the retort, fearing the crack it could cause in our already fragile agreement. Jack's parents were no help. They were educated, polished, a stark contrast to my high school diploma and diner-stained uniform. They barely acknowledged me, and on the rare occasions they did, it was to offer a backhanded compliment or a thinly veiled critique. "You would understand this if you had finished your education, dear," Jack's mother would say, sipping her perfectly brewed tea as she glanced over the top of her glasses. Jack didn't defend me, he just nodded along, soaking up their words like gospel. More and more he'd spend nights there, escaping our cramped apartment and the responsibilities it housed. One evening, as I scrubbed the diner's grease from under my nails, Jack dropped another bomb. "I'm staying at my parents' tonight. Need a real study environment and a good night's sleep." I slammed the bathroom cabinet a little harder than necessary. "Fine, do what you got to do." The words were sharp, stung with all the Things I couldn't say. As the days bled into months, I found solace in my routines, the repetitive tasks of my jobs allowing me to zone out the mounting frustrations at home. I was a robot moving through the motions: scan items, smile, serve food, clean up, rinse and repeat. One particularly long night I came home to an empty apartment. No Jack, no apologies, just a note: gone to study, make sure dinner's ready, Jack Horrow. I crumpled the note, the paper cutting into my palm, alone in the dim light of our kitchen. I allowed myself a moment to really feel it all: the exhaustion, the loneliness, the simmering anger. I leaned against the counter, eyes closed, a silent tear escaping despite my best efforts. After years of grinding through 2 jobs and watching Jack bury himself in his books, the day finally came when he graduated. Jack landed a job almost immediately at a prestigious company, and the news brought a breath of fresh air into our strained lives. His new job came with a paycheck that felt like a lottery. When compared to my nightly tips at the diner, I remember sitting across from him at our small kitchen table one evening, the excitement bubbling up inside me. So with your new job, I was thinking, it might be time for me to cut back at work and start looking at programs, to pick up where I left off, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, laden with hopes and dreams long deferred. Jack didn't look up from his plate. Emily, we can't afford that. Every penny has to be accounted for, and with the way things are, you know how tight the budget is. His fork clattered against the plate, a harsh sound that matched his words. I leaned back, my heart sinking but not yet defeated. I could keep one job, maybe just the day shifts. We'd still have a steady income and I could manage night classes. He shook his head, his voice firm, dismissive. Just forget about college, Emily. We need stability, not more debts. It's not practical. The conversation ended there, but the argument continued in my head for days before I could press the issue further. I found out I was pregnant. Our daughter Sophie became my new priority, and college faded into the background. A dream dissolved. Raising Sophie was a joy, but it was also another chain tying me to routines and responsibilities I hadn't chosen alone. I continued working at the grocery store, my dreams shelled like the products I stocked. Jack's criticisms didn't stop with my shelled education, they seeped into my parenting. You're not doing it right, Emily. She needs to learn proper manners, not whatever it is you're trying to teach her, Jack would say, barely looking up from his phone. I remember holding Sophie close, whispering promises to her that I'd begun to doubt I could keep. It's okay, baby, mommy's here. As Sophie grew, Jack's parents became more involved, their influence overshadowing mine. They paid for a fancy preschool, and every school event was an exhibition of their grand parental pride. One evening, Jack Clay explained a new rule: Emily, it's best if you don't come to the school events. The teachers, they have a certain expectation of family. We can't ruin Sophie's opportunities. I felt the sting of those words, a slap dressed up as paternal concern. So what am I supposed to do? Just stay home and pretend I don't have a daughter who's growing up learning things I'm not teaching her, becoming someone I barely know? It's for the best, was all he said, his indifference the final nail in the coffin of our once shared dreams. The years twisted along, and Jack's words had weight, not the kind that anchors you in safety, but the kind that pulls you under. His sharp commands to our daughter Sophie left marks, teaching her the lessons of disrespect and disdain toward me, her mother. Emily, don't bother telling her what to do. She listens to me, not you. It's for her own good, Jack snapped one evening when I suggested Sophie might set the table in front of Sophie. His words were always like this. I watched, heart sinking, as my little girl's eyes hardened to match her father's. You don't know anything, Mom, Sophie would toss at me when I asked for help around the house. Her tone mimicked her father's, each word a barb. I tried to reach her to bridge the widening gap with mother-daughter chats, but she only pulled further away, retreating to a world where I couldn't follow, a world painted by Jack and his parents. One humiliating afternoon brought everything painfully into focus. Sophie had friends over, laughter and light voices echoing down the hallway of our home. I was cleaning when I bumped into them in the hall. Sophie froze, her eyes darting between me and her friends. I smiled, wiping my hands on my apron, about to say hello, but before the words could form, Sophie cut in. Oh, this is just our housekeeper. Her friends nodded, barely giving me a second glance as they shuffled past into Sophie's immaculately kept room, off limits to the likes of me. The door clicked shut and the muffled bursts of teenage giggles were like needles to my chest. I retreated to the kitchen, Sinking against the fridge as tears betrayed my resolve not to let this break me. I was her mother, not some dismissed servant in my own home. That evening I confronted Jack, my voice shaking but firm. How can you let our daughter treat me like this? Today she called me the housekeeper Jack in our home. Jack didn't look up from his paper. Maybe if you didn't look the part she'd respect you more. You're always cleaning, always in those rags. What do you expect? His words stung, slicing through whatever defenses I had left. I'm trying, Jack, I'm trying to make this a home, but you and your parents, you're teaching her to hate me, he scoffed, folding his newspaper with precision. Emily, you need to stop being so sensitive. She's growing up in a different world than you did. She needs to fit in. Nights turned restless, my thoughts spiraling. Jack's distancing, the casual cruelty of his parents, and now Sophie's rejection painted a stark picture. I was an outsider in my own life, my role diminished to that of a silent provider, unseen and appreciated. As I watched Sophie grow into a teenager, her embarrassment of me became more pronounced. Her comments about my outdated clothes, my simple manners, cut deeper because they echoed Jack's words. She was ashamed to be seen with me, her mother who had sacrificed everything only to be rendered invisible. Turning 37 wasn't supposed to be a milestone, but I had hoped it would be a turning point for something better, something kinder. With a heart full of tentative hope, I booked a table at a nice restaurant downtown, a small celebration, just me, Jack and Sophie. Nothing fancy, but something to maybe, just maybe, bring us back together for a night. I got home from work, my spirits buoyed by the thought of a quiet dinner with my family. The apartment was quiet when I walked in, too quiet. Jack and Sophie were sitting in the living room, their faces turned towards the TV, looking like they were braced for bad news. Hey, I've got a surprise. I booked us a table at Marcello's for dinner to celebrate my birthday, just the three of us, I said, my voice bright, forcing cheerfulness into the edges of my exhaustion. Jack turned off the TV and looked at me, an eyebrow raised, a smirk playing at the corner of his lips. Emily, seriously, you think we want to go out and celebrate with you? A dropout? What would we even talk about? Jack's words were casual but they deep, his smirk turning into a sneer. Yeah, Mom, it's kind of embarrassing. You wouldn't even know which fork to use, Sophie added, her words echoing her father's disdain. I felt my face flush, the sting of their words like a slap. I just thought we could be a family for tonight. Jack laughed, a harsh mocking sound. A family with you making a fool of yourself? No thanks, actually, here's my gift to you. He stood up, walked over to his briefcase and pulled out an envelope, tossing it onto the coffee table with a dramatic flourish. Confused, I picked it up, my hands trembling. It was a divorce application. This is your gift. Yeah, consider yourself free from us. We're done, Emily. I'm taking Sophie and we're moving out. You can keep this place, he said, his words cold. Calcul at Sophie just nodded, standing up to join her father. I'd rather live with Dad. I can't be seen with you, Mom. It's just too embarrassing. They packed up their things with chilling efficiency. I watched frozen as my world was dismantled piece by piece, not just the physical pieces of our lives but the last vestiges of any affection, any pretense of a relationship. They left without a goodbye, the door closing with a soft click that echoed like a gunshot in the empty apartment. The divorce proceedings were quick, clinical and brutal. Jack's parents testified about my inadequacies, painting me as an uneducated, unfit mother in stark, unforgiving strokes. Even Sophie spoke, her voice steady, her words rehearsed. I want to live with my dad, he's better for me. Sitting there in that sterile courtroom, listening to the litany of my supposed failures, I felt something inside me break. Or maybe it was something coming together, a realization hardening into resolve. They were all strangers, their words no longer capable of wounding me as they once had. I was alone, truly alone, but perhaps that was the freedom I needed. I knew one thing for sure, I needed to prove, if to no one else but myself, that I was capable of much more. That burning resolve led me back to the doors of the college I had left years ago. I enrolled again, older than most of my classmates and with a fierceness in me that only life's hard knocks can bestow. I hired tutors, spending evenings grappling with investment theories and financial models. My eyes blur from the strain. Social media was a minefield, though every so often a photo of Jack, Sophie and that woman, Jack's new partner, would pop up. They looked happy, carefree, living it up in some swanky downtown apartment that screamed luxury. The sting of seeing them so blissful while I was over here piecing myself back together was a sharp one, but instead of letting it drag me down. I used it as fuel. Each picture, each post pushed me harder. I channeled my anger, my hurt into my studies, turning bitterness into a motivator. Graduation day came and I was a different woman from the one who had started. You've got what it takes, Emily. Don't let anyone tell you differently. My favorite professor, Dr. Carter, told me during our final meeting. His words were a balm to the raw edges of my pride. With his recommendation, I landed a position at a respected firm, stepping into the world of finance with a determination to rise. The corporate world was another battlefield, but one I was now well equipped to navigate. I started as just another employee, but not for long. Within 3 years I climbed from the ground floor to the department head, my name on an office door, my decisions shaping the company's future. Alongside my career, I revamped my life. I traded my old battered car for something sleek and new, something that hummed under my touch like a promise. My apartment followed from modest to modern, a high-rise with views of the city that twinkled like the stars. I was reaching for shopping for new clothes. Wasn't just about style, it was about armor. Each piece, whether a sharp suit or a sleek dress, was chosen to project the new me, the competent, capable businesswoman. My hair, once always pulled back in a practical ponytail, now fell in stylish waves or was pinned up in chic designs that said I cared about every detail. Only my closest friends knew the extent of my transformation. You're doing what you were meant to do, Emily. It's like you finally found your stage, my friend Rachel told me over coffee one day, her eyes wide as she took in the changes. Yet I guess I have, I add, sipping my espresso. Jack and Sophie and all the pain associated with them faded into the background, becoming just a part of my story, not the defining chapter. There I was browsing job listings late one night when I stumbled across an opening that made my heart skip a beat, a department head position at none other than the company where my ex-husband Jack worked. I applied, half out of a deep-seated need to prove myself, half out of the sheer audacity of it all. The interview was the next week. I walked in there with all the confidence of a woman who had nothing to lose and everything to prove. The interviewers were a panel of 3, each more impressed than the last, as we discussed everything from market trends to financial strategies. By the end they seemed genuinely excited about what I could bring to the table. Well, Emily, I must say it's refreshing to see such a clear vision and detailed knowledge. We'd be lucky to have you on board. The senior interviewer remarked, a genuine smile spreading across his face. Thank you, I'm ready to hit the ground running, I replied, my tone steady, my resolve firmer than ever. My first day was something out of a movie. As I was introduced to my new team, the room was filled with polite applause and welcoming smiles. That was until Jack's face came into view. The shock on his face could have powered the city for hours. He looked like he'd seen ghost, his eyes wide, his mouth slightly agape. The head of the company, Mr. Reynolds, seemed amused by the situation. He clapped a hand on my shoulder and announced, everyone, I expect you'll give Emily all the support she needs. She comes highly recommended and I believe she will lead this department to new heights. Jack's reaction was less than gracious. As the room cleared, he stormed up to Mr. Reynolds, his voice low but harsh. I applied for this position. Why was it given to her? What does she have that I don't? Mr. Reynolds looked at Jack, then at me, an eyebrow raised. Jack, the decision was based purely on merit. Emily's qualifications and vision for the department far exceed what you've shown us so far. There's a lot you could learn from her. Learn from her? This is some kind of joke, right? Jack scoffed, his voice rising. No joke, Jack. I suggest you adjust your attitude and focus on your own responsibilities, Mr. Reynolds replied coolly. Humiliated, Jack did something I never expected. He threw his ID badge down on the table, muttered something about a stupid boss and stormed out. Mr. Reynolds sighed, shaking his head as he watched Jack leave. Sorry about that, Emily, I'll handle it from here. Why don't you get started with your team? I nodded, a small satisfied smile playing on my lips as I watched Jack disappear down the hallway. The sound of his furious footsteps was like music to my ears. Later I overheard Mr. Reynolds on the phone. Yes, he resigned. No, I can't give him a positive recommendation, not after this. The rest of the day was a blur of introductions and planning sessions, but through it all one thought remained clear in my mind. Justice in its own twisted way had been served. Jack had underestimated me just like he always did, but this time I had come out on top. After Jack stormed out of the office that day, his career spiraled downward faster than I could have imagined. Rumors reached me through mutual acquaintances, ones who couldn't wait to spill the beans, that Jack's latest mistress had kicked him and Sophie out of her plush apartment. Desperate, they had no choice but to move back in with Jack's parents. I couldn't help but think how the mighty had fallen. It was during this tumultuous time That Sophie, now a college student and every bit as demanding as she had been taught to be, showed up at my door. She let out a low whistle. Wow mom, you really upgraded. Ha, guest dumping dad worked out for you. Her tone was light but there was an edge to it that put me on guard. Sophie, what brings you here? She sauntered in, making herself comfortable on my plush sofa as if she owned the place. Well, things are a bit tight at grandpa's and I thought, you're rich, well dressed and educated now. Maybe I could move in here, but I'd need a decent allowance. Obviously I looked at her, then really looked at her and saw Jack's influence woven deeply into her demeanor. It pained me but the clarity it brought was undeniable. Sophie, I think you should leave. I'm not going to be used like this, not by you, not by anyone. Her face crumpled into tears but they didn't move me like they used to when her tears failed to sway me. Her temper flared. You're just selfish, just like you always were, she shouted as she stormed out, her parting words a sting in the sea of my apartment. News trickled back to me over the following weeks. Jack had started drinking, unable to cope with his bruised ego, and Sophie moved to another city, perhaps to chase the independence she so desperately craved. As for me, life settled into a rhythm of success and new beginnings. I met Daniel, a colleague whose kindness and quiet strength were the antithesis of Jack's bluster and cruelty. Over time our friendship deepened into love and we married in a small joyful ceremony surrounded by those who truly wished us well. Reflecting on the tumultuous journey, I realized I had come out stronger, wiser and more compassionate. I had lost a family only to find myself, and in doing so gained a chance at a love and life that was genuine and fulfilling. Looking ahead, I felt ready for whatever came next, secure in the knowledge that I had not only survived but thrived, crafting a narrative of triumph that was entirely my own.